While various public officials continue to stir up, let's start over on that, please. While various elected officials continue to stir up emotions on the issue of the public beaches, there are a number of more vital issues which affect more Oregonians than do the dry sands along the Pacific Ocean. The fact that general fund estimates for the next biennium were revised downward by about $10 million today is not nearly as dramatic as the battle of the beaches, but sooner or later will affect Oregonians who haven't been to the beach for years. Top budget estimates started out at something like $610 million, and former Governor Mark Hatfield based his budget on that figure. Governor Tom McCall took a more conservative figure based on later estimates of closer to $600 million. Since then, monthly estimates have been ranging downward, and now we're down to somewhere around $570 million. So you see, the legislature has problems that, though they don't make controversial headlines, nevertheless are the nuts and bolts of keeping this state running on an even keel for the next 2 years after the legislature adjourns. Still facing the Solons are such gut issues as property tax relief and the sales tax proposal, air and water pollution, and the very real question as to whether a state agency should be allowed to authorize a city to issue revenue-producing bonds when the taxpayers of that same city have already rejected such a bond issue. These are questions that affect every citizen of our state, and yet the mail and telegrams on these issues has been practically nil. Those elected to public office to represent the people do indeed have an obligation to stir up emotions to rectify what they believe to be wrongs. But they do a disservice to their office and to the people if in doing so they disregard other issues equally important. It should perhaps be pointed out that the news reporters here in the Capitol did not see the committee's vote on the beach bill of such importance that we made headlines of it. For the bill itself was not tabled by the committee, which indicated that the committee did not consider the bill dead. It wasn't until Governor McCall decided to make an issue of it that it suddenly made headlines. This is Bob Bruce reporting from the state capitol in Salem for Channel 6 Television News in Portland.
We're not interested, nobody, I know Governor McCall is not, I know that I am not, I know that other supporters of this bill are not interested in abusing private property rights. But we do feel that the public playground area is on the dry sand section of the beach, and this is what's being threatened by a very few commercial developers down on the coast, who are attempting to build walls out into the dry sand area, or are building fences to keep the public off of this area. We're at a crossroads in Oregon in regard to our beaches. And whether this session of the legislature acts in supporting and passing out House Bill 1601, or whether it turns its back on this problem, is going to determine which way we go in Oregon. And if the legislature turns its back on passing this needed legislation, you won't recognize the Oregon coast 4 years from now, because it'll be fenced and it'll be built on, and it'll look like the East Coast, and it'll look like much of the area down in California.
House Speaker Monty Montgomery, for the past several days, has been working with a number of people, including beach property owners, geologists, lawyers, members of the Highway Committee, seeking an equitable solution to the controversy over House Bill 1601. As a result, he will tomorrow offer a number of amendments to the bill, which are designed to protect the interests of all concerned, particularly the general public and its right to use the beaches, and the interest of the property owners along the beach. The proposed amendments provide in part that the Highway Commission will be given the power over easements to public beaches and to bring legal proceedings where necessary to establish such easements. The amendments would provide a zoning plan to provide that no structure or improvement could be built along public beaches with those structures already built accepted. The gist of the amendments is to ensure that much as Oregon's coastline for public use as possible, to discourage the necessity for putting up barriers or obstacles by private landowners to prevent public use, and to suggest to the Highway Commission that future use of private-owned beach lands can be accomplished by common law condemnation proceedings, which automatically require compensation for property owners. In effect, if the amendments are adopted, the bill would then preserve that property which belongs to the public and preserve that property which is privately owned. It's a bill which all factions should be able to support. Since Governor Tom McCall kicked off the fires of controversy over this issue last week, there have been many throwing gasoline on that fire in a manner which has resulted in more emotion than logic beclouding the real issues here. The amendments offered by Montgomery should clear the air as well as the beaches. This is Bob Bruce reporting from the state capitol in Salem for Channel 6 Television News in Portland.
There is no question that the courts would declare it unconstitutional, and nothing would have been done to preserve or save our beaches. It is further my opinion that House Bill 1601 was totally inadequate to protect the beaches of this state. And I would like to briefly summarize what these proposed amendments will do that House Bill 1601 failed to do. In the first place, the amendments provide for a 200-foot zone of dry sand from the line of Washington to California, on which no landowner may erect any structure. I would like to remind the members of the committee that there are vast stretches in the state of Oregon of beach land which has not been used in the past by the public, and under no interpretation of the law could we construe that we have a prescriptive easement to that land. We are now beginning to open up access into these beaches. And if we do not pass some type of zoning law such as is proposed in these amendments, I can see that only we will have on these beaches hot dog stands, fences, and other structures which will be a blight to those beaches and a loss of a valuable resource.
I think that the tone and temper of these amendments in numerous instances, not just one isolated case, but in numerous instances, the tone and the temper and the objective of the amendments is to shrink the public interest on the beach and to enlarge the private interests. I think that these amendments, if adopted, would be a real sellout of the public right to enjoyment of the beach and the rights that they have already acquired over the years. And I hope that this committee will very firmly and very sternly reject these amendments.
The Board of County Commissioners today have come out solidly in favor of House Bill 1601 by sending a resolution to the legislature telling them that we do not approve of playing fast and loose with the public's rights on Oregon's beaches. We think the legislature should pass out House Bill 1601 and protect the public's rights in the legislature.
Recognition by the legislature of the existence of easements acquired by dedication, prescription, grant, or otherwise on some of the beachlands of Oregon. 2. Declaration that the public rights are included within state recreation areas so that the Highway Commission can legally spend money for policing and improvements. At the present time, the Commission is of the opinion it cannot spend money in these areas because it has no legal authority to spend money except in accordance with the Constitution and in accordance with statutes that abide by the Constitution relating to the highway trust funds. The third point, authorization to the Highway Commission to administer, protect, and preserve the rights of the public. Now, we think that the Highway Commission is the logical agency to do this because the legislature has previously given to it the supervision of the wet sands area. 4, definition of that portion of the beach to which prescriptive rights of the public shall be defended by the state. The governor's opposition to any amendment or language that would in any way adversely affect the public's legal and traditional rights to use of the beach areas.
Since last night, when the compromise issue, so-called, was released on House Bill 1601, there's been some problems developing on the coast with properties. Now, this particular shot with a 14-foot elevation well within the city of Nescoin. It's obvious that we have some real problems here if we're going to say that no one can build any structures within 16 feet of elevation and exclude entire towns from this provision. The original intent was to save the beaches for the public and not to go inland in a fantastic 16-foot elevation figure.
The House Highway Committee this afternoon took official note of the amendments which were announced yesterday to House Bill 1601, the Beach Bill. With all members present, Representatives Lee Johnson, who presented the amendments for Speaker Montgomery last Thursday, and House Minority Leader James Redden, who subsequently worked with Johnson over the weekend in hammering out the version accepted by all parties yesterday, spelled out what those amendments are meant to do. The major change in the Montgomery amendments is the elevation point of 16 feet. Now, this is the line which Governor McCall's crew of oceanographers came up with at the beach on Saturday. It was on that tour that Governor McCall stated that the politicians and the lawyers had confused the issue and that now the scientists were going to settle the question. But by mid-afternoon, the politicians and the lawyers were trying to understand such phrases from the scientists as mean lower low tide, mean winter high tide, horizontal datum, and digesting the startling information that sea level datum is an imaginary surface. If committee members seemed slightly confused by all this technical jargon, spectators were completely lost by it all. As the hearing continued, one lawmaker said that he was reminded of Bob Linott's weather forecast when Bob gets technical. He wants people to understand why the sun will or will not shine, but by the time he gets through, most people will just take his word for it. But committee members are dealing with something a little more serious than the weather. And they want to get some answers before giving House Bill 1601 as amended their blessing. And one question might be, can one really drown in a sea level datum that is an imaginary surface? Bob Bruce reporting from the state capitol for Channel 6 Television News, Portland.
Do you subscribe to Governor McCall's formula for locating the line of public and private use 16 feet above, well, I won't get in technicalities.
Mm-hmm. Well, Governor McCall has had a large panel of experts working on this, and it's a very advantageous resolve from our point of view. And I think it's a fair one. We have to just take what the experts have to say on this, is my opinion on this thing. It'd be presumptuous, again, to try to dictate to these people or try to analyze what a real large panel of experts are doing on it.
But you'd rather have this line farther up on the beach rather than the one that's been proposed yesterday, which is lower down, closer to the tide line.
Well, the 12-foot line, and then they had, or 300, whichever is less. We feel that this is quite a ways down the beach in some areas.
Well, I believe that Governor McCall's formula for the line between private and public property on the beach would take away some existing buildings, front yards of existing homes. Do you think this is a fair thing to do?
Well, first, you were talking in terms of the property line being established by this. This isn't the case at all. This is an area of concern and responsibility of the state where we want to preserve what we feel is a proud Oregon heritage and an open beach policy, and to preserve the beaches that are there. And as far as taking something away from people, something that's established and was built in good faith, you couldn't do this legally anyway, from what I understand. And this isn't the intention. The intention of this line is to outline an area where the state has a concern and the public has a concern to preserve. We want the area that people generally think of as the beach. Now, where this technical line comes, this is a matter for technical people and for the legal people to work out. We're after the preserving the beaches, but when you use a term like beach, you have to start defining it, and I think that's what Governor McCall's group is doing.
So in other words, if existing seawalls are there, the public's not used to using that property, therefore it's not something you can preempt.
Oh, of course not. This is, I think, a nebulous argument, and it's leading to a lot of confusion in people's minds.
One last question now. If the legislature does not come up with a satisfactory solution according to your views and your organization, what will you do about it?
I'm afraid we'll have no choice. I don't, you make me sound threatening here. To the initiative petition, this is not only our right, but our responsibility.
You will circulate petitions, get signatures, and hope to put it on the ballot?
We will have to, yes.
As a final?
As a final, but we're not trying to threaten anybody. I would like to see the legislature in Salem work this problem out. I think people are working very hard at it.
It had been obvious since the Highway Committee meeting considering the beach bill on Monday that the 16-foot elevation line formula, which Governor Tom McCall and his band of oceanographers brought back from the beach of itself, was not workable as the single factor in describing in House Bill 1601 those beach areas which are to come under the law. Last night, in a meeting in the Board of Control room here in the Capitol, the oceanographers and the civil engineers from Oregon State University admitted that at least one other factor must be considered for the reason that the 16-foot elevation line would not properly describe all of Oregon's beaches, and in at least some areas would go back much further than the law is intended to protect. So the second factor was suggested, a 300-foot zoning strip along the coastline that would in effect serve two purposes. First, the 300-foot zone would be used in those areas where the 16-foot elevation line would be impractical. Secondly, it would give the Highway Commission the authority to hold the beach areas and hold the line, in a manner of speaking. But the committee recognized too last night that, as did a spokesman for Governor Tom McCall, Ed Westerdahl, that there simply is not enough information available from any source to accurately describe boundaries for all of Oregon's beaches. The oceanographers and civil engineers said that they measured 3 beaches last week and that the job simply could not be done in one day. So a final section was suggested to the law. The Highway Commission would be directed to survey the entire Oregon coastline from the Columbia River to the California state line. They would establish suitable boundaries and gather information which would be reported back to the next session of the legislature, which would then amend the law to establish those boundaries permanently. It will be some time before emotions and tempers subside on the beach issue, but when they do, it's predictable that those committee members who continued to work toward the goal everybody wanted, despite tremendous pressures, and finally found a solution, will get the sympathy and understanding from Oregonians, which they certainly have not had in the past 2 weeks. Bob Bruce reporting from the state capitol in Salem for Channel 6 Television News in Portland. Passage by the House today of the controversial beach bill culminated several weeks of furor that strained relations between the governor's office and the Legislative Assembly almost to the breaking point. The bill is expected to make a fast run through the Senate and end up on the desk of Governor Tom McCall within a week. Senate President Debs Potts says he'll not stand for any political shenanigans on this one. Contrary to Governor McCall's statement on Friday that the bill was headed for the Senate Judiciary Committee, Potts says it's going to the Rules Committee, where lawyers like Senator Tony Yaturi and Senator Thomas R. Mahoney will look it over. There is more than passing significance in the passage of House Bill 1601 by the House today, for it turned out to be something more than an exercise in the legislative process. It proved once again that the legislature can and does on occasion prove its equality with the executive branch in the system of checks and balances provided by our Constitution. Governor Tom McCall threatened to lead an initiative campaign if House Bill 1601 were not passed. He asked for it in its original form with no amendments, to spell out descriptions of the beach or with any consideration for those people who own property and pay taxes on it. The rallying cry was House Bill 1601, no amendments, no compromise. But despite the pressures applied by the governor, which resulted in thousands of telegrams, letters, and telephone calls and editorials, the legislators continued to work toward what they thought would be a workable bill. They now think they have one that will do what everybody wants, protect the beaches for the use of the general public. The system of checks and balances works well in such a situation. A governor can veto any bill, but the legislature, acting in concert, can override that veto with a two-thirds vote and have the final say. This, of course, won't happen in the present instance. The beach bill simply proved that the system of checks and balances still works. This is Bob Bruce reporting from the state capitol in Salem for Channel 6 Television News in Portland.
The bill allows that the State Highway Commission can bring suit against beachfront property owners without compensation for the loss of the rights of their property, but the beachfront property owner would retain the right to pay the taxes and the title. I think this is an unfair way to go, and I think the bill needs to be amended to allow some compensation for one thing. Number two, the bill still refers to a vegetation line. This is a moot point because it can't be determined, and I think that it's going to be a problem in the courts to determine where a vegetation line is on the coast, and beachfront property owners and those involved are fearful of that designation. Three, there is a good deal of property in public ownership, and as a matter of fact, more than half of the beach frontage in the state of Oregon is owned by the public at the present time, and we have an energetic program to go into beach access on every 3 miles, which will enhance the public's position in this area, and I think that the public in the state of Oregon has a better opportunity for beach access than any other state in the nation.
This bill is important more for what it symbolizes than what is actually in it as far as words are concerned. It brings to the public's attention the situation that poses the threat of access to the beaches of the state of Oregon. We were comfortable in the feeling that the beaches belong to the public. The discussion around this bill involves questions that raise doubt as to whether the public even so can reach those beaches. Therefore, I think it's a matter of tremendous importance that this be resolved as soon as possible. It may involve the Supreme Court of the state of Oregon, but in any event, we must fight to reestablish, in fact, in the most meaningful way, the concept of the public ownership of our beaches established by that great Oregonian, Oz West, some 50 to 55 years ago. This we cannot live without as Oregonians.